All right. Yeah. Good evening, everyone. My name is Silas. Welcome to Brookline Booksmith's author event series. Thank you for keeping your phones on silent. If you haven't picked up our pre-ordered book or you'd like to buy a book, you can do so in the back after the event, and there will be time for a Q&A. So get your questions ready. We're here tonight to celebrate American Breakdown, our ailing nation, my body's revolt, and the 19th century woman who brought me back to life, with author Jennifer Lunden in conversation with women's health journalist Catherine Guthrie. Catherine Guthrie, author of Flat, Reclaiming My Body from Breast Cancer, is an award-winning women's health journalist. She has faced breast cancer twice, and for the past 20 years, her reporting, essays, and criticism have appeared in dozens of national magazines, including Time, the Oprah magazine, Slate, Cosmopolitan, Prevention, and the Yoga Journal. She lives in Somerville, Massachusetts. Welcome, Catherine. Jennifer Lunden is an author, poet, licensed clinical social worker, and former therapist. Lunden is the recipient of many fellowships and grants, which I will now attempt to pronounce correctly. Sometimes I get tongue-tied, so this is exciting. Okay, the 2019 Maine Arts Fellowship for Literary Arts, the 2016 Bread Loaf Rona Jaffe Foundation Scholarship for Nonfiction, the Canada Council for the Arts, the Money for Women Barbara Deming Memorial Fund, Yaddo, the Virginia Center for Creative Arts, Hedgebrook, Monson Arts, Hewn Oaks, and the Dora Maar House in the south of France. Welcome, Lunden.
Thank you.
Yeah. American Breakdown is a wide-ranging, genre-crossing literary mystery that interweaves the author's quest to understand the source of her own condition with her telling of the story of the chronically ill 19th century diarist Alice James, ultimately uncovering the many hidden health hazards of life in America. When Jennifer Lunden became chronically ill after moving from Canada to Maine, her case was a medical mystery. Just 21, unable to hold a book or stand for a shower, she lost her job and consigned herself to her bed. The doctor she went to for help told her she was just depressed. After suffering from this enigmatic illness for 5 years, she discovered an unlikely source of hope and healing, a biography of Alice James, the bright, witty, and often bedridden sibling of brothers Henry James, the novelist, and William James, the father of psychology. Alice suffered from a life-threatening illness known as neurasthenia, now often dismissed as a fashionable illness. In this meticulously researched and illuminating debut, Lunden interweaves her own experience with Alice's, exploring the history of medicine and the effects of the Industrial Revolution and late-stage capitalism to tell a riveting story of how we are a nation struggling and failing to be healthy. And here to tell us all about it are Catherine Guthrie and Jennifer Lunden.
Before Catherine says anything first, can you hear me? Is this a good distance? Can you hear me? Like
A little bit louder. A little louder.
A little louder. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just stay close to the mic. And Catherine and I have been trying to figure out which year we were at Bread Loaf, which is a writers' conference, where we met, and it was now confirmed by Silas. It was 2016.
Definitely. Thank you, Silas. So are you going, or would you like to read?
Yes. So I'm gonna start with reading the first few pages of the book, because it gives a good sense of what the book's about and where it's going. I'm gonna get everything set up just right. That's yours. I imagine her in the summer of 1862, swimming with friends off the coast of Newport, all of them laughing and teasing, splashing around, showing off, the things young people did in the water in the mid-19th century and still do. They've swum out beyond the surf, and the water is calm and warm, and for a moment, perhaps, Alice James feels free. She is 13, on the cusp of young womanhood and all its accompanying constraints. The water sparkles in the sunshine, rippling around her body. Does she swim the breaststroke to protect her hair? Does she float on her back and look up at the vast blue sky? Or does she dive down deep, eyes open, reveling in a world so different from the one above the surface? Looking back almost 30 years later, Alice wrote in her diary of that vanished girl, lamenting her, quote, blank, youthful mind, ignorant of catastrophe. I was 26 years old when I first laid eyes on the gold spine of Jean Strauss's Alice James, a Biography, and pulled it down from the shelf. I'd heard about Alice. We had something in common. We'd both been felled by a mysterious fatigue. The book is fragile now. Its cover barely holds on to the spine, and some of the pages are falling out, and most of them bear some kinds of markings. Inside, I see the price, $2.50, still penciled inside the front cover. Someone else had owned the book before me. When I bought it, I took a purple pen to her name, crossed it out, and wrote my own and the year, 1994. I'd been sick for 5 years. I didn't know then that the book was treasure in my hands. It would become my company, my work, my healing. At the time, I was the live-in caretaker of a 1789 historic house museum in Maine, its substantial perennial garden laid out in measured decorum inside a white picket fence. When I think now of that garden, I see it bursting in the violent bloom of high summer, stands of white liatris spiking the azure sky, gold rudbeckia 6 feet tall and toppling, aphids on the helianthus, mold on the phlox, weeds overwhelming all the back beds. The garden was too much for me. From the bedroom window on the second floor, I could see the explosion of color, a carnival of red, yellow, purple, and pink. But I rarely looked down upon the garden from the bedroom window, because what I saw more than anything, even from that vantage, was my failure to keep up. For me, the garden was something to be contended with, when I should have been weeding it, taming it, saving it from itself. Instead, I lay in bed, in the cool of the oscillating fan, reading about my dead bed comrade, Alice James. In Alice, I met my Victorian counterpart, my kindred spirit, and somehow reading about her, bright, witty, proud, and stuck, I began becoming unstuck. Why was Alice sick? Why was I? From my bed, and with the aid of interlibrary loan and a helpful librarian, I set out on a journey to find some answers. I spent years researching American history, 19th century and contemporary toxicology, biology, medical history, economics, environmental history, sociology, chaos theory, and more. And by the time I finished, things were a whole lot clearer. Thank you.
Wonderful, I love that. Beautiful introduction to the book as well. Can you guys hear me? I know the math is a tiny bit difficult, but better? Yeah, thank you. So I wanted to start by asking you about what kind of reader did you envision while you were writing this book?
So, I started researching the book in 2001, and I started writing it in 2007. And at that time, I was really interested in the commonalities between Alice James's illness and mine. I did say somewhere in what I read that she was who she was, okay, good. I wanted to research that and explore our two stories, but I also, I'm gonna say, the 3-letter word that starts with A, because we're in a bookstore, we can say whatever we want, and that's not even barely a bad word. The fire under my ass.
Perfect.
Thank you. Was the first doctor that I had, who she was pretty cold with me when I was first sick, and I just could feel that she didn't believe that I was as sick as I was telling her I was. And a lot of women have that experience, especially women. I'm sure some men do too, but especially women commonly, about lots of different illnesses. And it's such a stigma. So she ended up telling me I was just depressed, and the best thing for me would be to get back to work. But I was depressed, but I was debilitated by chronic fatigue. At the time, it was undiagnosed. I had mono. It started with a virus, a case of mononucleosis. And I am going to come back to my point, which was, she was the fire to my ass. And she was sort of like the mouthpiece for the larger culture, where researchers at the CDC were dismissing the illness when there were doctors raising the alarm that something was happening that was really bad. And the national NIH, what does that stand for, do you remember?
National Institutes of Health.
That's why we need a women's health journalist on board. My brain isn't as on board as I would like it to be, so I can't remember simple things like National Institutes of Health. Anyway, they were not funding studies, and the media was calling it yuppie flu. So this was in 1989 when I first got sick. And that's such a stigma against the illness. I wanted to write a book that would destigmatize the illness and help give a voice to other people with ME/CFS, which is, I gotta tell you, that it's now called myalgic encephalomyelitis / chronic fatigue syndrome. And so we just call it ME/CFS. So I wanted to give a voice to those of us in that community, as well as those who have an overlapping syndrome that some of us have called multiple chemical sensitivity. But that wasn't the only thing that I wanted to do. I wanted to write a book that would be relevant to a wide audience. And what I found as I kept researching was that, it wasn't just a story of Alice and me, it was a bigger picture. And one of the people in the book, who's a colleague and friend, Jennifer Tuttle, she and I would get together, and we have overlapping. She's a professor and with the same interests as I have, and she helped me see that everything tied to industrial capitalism, and that, as Silas said in the opening, that America's particularly virulent form of industrial capitalism impacts not just my health and not just yours, but the health of everybody in this bookstore and all over the country. Just how's that?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Excellent. Excellent. And so you refer to Alice James as your Victorian counterpart and soul sister. If Alice could join us for tonight's discussion, what would you want to ask her or say to her?
Catherine did some research before this interview and discovered that she and her family, she comes from the James family, they lived in Cambridge, and they're buried in Cambridge. And so we went today and we found her gravestone and that of her family members. And it's like an opportunity. I want to, what I want to say to her? So Alice was sick with this illness called neurasthenia that was common in the 19th century. And a lot of people think it was just struck women, or just struck wealthy women, but it actually struck women and men of all income ranges, just like ME/CFS was first thought to be something that just struck yuppie women. That is not the case. And Alice, the thing I would want to say to Alice is, first I want to read a quote from her. I just want you to, she was so witty. I just still love her. I still read her quotes and they make me laugh out loud. So I wanted to read a little bit about her. And so towards the end of her life, William James, her brother, wrote her a pitying letter that included his perception of her, quote, stifling slowly in a quagmire of disgust and pain and impotence. So, I mean, that was his idea of sending her some sympathy. And she and her partner, Catherine, had roared over his letter she wrote back. She said, "We roared over it, for I consider myself one of the most potent creatures of my time, one of the most potent creations of my time." And this is a woman who spent most of her life in bed and was just really, her life was made very small by her body, by the constraints of her body, but her mind was big. And I just love that there was this part that considered herself, amidst all that, bedridden, taken care of by people, potent. And so what I would want to say to her is, you were totally right, Alice. You were so potent that you made it through to this time in 2023, where somebody who you never knew wrote a whole book in part that was inspired by you and your life and your wit and your ferocity. And like, thank you for giving what you could, even though you were right down under it. But there's also a question that I would want to ask, which is, do you wish, so Alice, the only reason we really know about Alice, other than that she was in this famous family, was that she wrote a journal towards the end of her life. I'm not sure when she started it. She died when she was in her mid-40s from breast cancer, and which is another commonality, right? Right. And but she started this journal as a way to not feel so alone with all of her. She felt like she was like an emotional volcano. Like she had a bigness of emotions that I can fully identify with. So I have big emotions in this body that can't always let me be out in the world as bigly as I otherwise would be. And so this journal is all that we have, other than her letters, her published letters. And I just wish, if I wonder if she wishes, or if she were here with us right now, I would ask her, do you wish that you'd written and published other stuff? Do you wish that you'd had more of a voice during your time? Now that you see how far women have come, and you know what we fought for and what we're capable of, do you wish?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah,
I'm not sure she would say yes, because she was, by the end of her life, she was so good at sort of just accepting what she had with pride.
And you write that Alice's symptoms were real and debilitating, but because their origins were not well understood, their legitimacy was suspect. And I really latched onto that, because I think a lot of women's issues, their legitimacy becomes suspect because they are not well understood by conventional medicine.
And why are they not well understood by conventional
Because
medicine?
we don't study women and women's bodies. But so this kind of gaslighting is common and exhausting. So what kept you going? You've often told me and others it took you 20 years to write this book. So given that gaslighting and how exhausting it is, what kept you going, and what advice do you have for other patients on how to navigate a system that delegitimizes their lived experience?
I want to move my mic over in my seat so I can also engage with you. I'm talking a lot to you, but I want to talk to everybody.
Sure.
There, maybe that's good. And I did that at the risk of forgetting the first thing that I was going to say. The first part of the question was
that what kept you going for those 20 years?
Let me think.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, I have a ferocity in me that's as strong as Alice's was. And you don't have, it doesn't matter if you have an illness that makes you feel weak and makes you literally weak, it doesn't mean you're not strong. And so that just kept me going. That's also part of what kept me going on my path to try to find answers and recovery. And because there was a point just before I met you, after I'd been like writing the book for 15 years or whatever, and I was writing it like in the spare moments. I also had a part-time job, and I also had a lot of medical appointments, and I wasn't even halfway through. And I felt like if I don't like get some help, I'm never gonna finish. I'm gonna be writing this book till I'm dead. And I didn't want to be writing the book anymore. And I let myself consider just letting it go. And that's not my style, I'm a finisher. And, but it was so liberating to let myself contemplate that. And I read some of the pages that I've written, and I just felt like this book is too important, and I've written too much that's too good to just let it go. I can't just let it go. I mean, that's a shame. There's so many writers that don't, for whatever variety of reasons, don't end up getting their work out there, and I couldn't do that. So that was when I started reaching out to residencies and grants to get help and trying to find a publisher, trying more actively to find a publisher to get an advance. And that's when we met.
Yay.
And then the second part of the question was,
The second
everything
part,
comes back to how we met.
love story. What advice do you have for other patients on how to navigate a system that delegitimizes their lived experience?
Yeah. So I wish I had like a really great answer, but I have a reasonably good answer that I don't think a lot of people do. And if more of us did, I think it would create a shift, a big shift potentially. And that is two things. One, if you have a doctor who disrespects you, tells off-color jokes at times of vulnerability, or any times, literally any times, or doesn't believe that you're sick when you know there's something wrong, find another doctor. And that's tough advice right now because it's actually really hard for people to find doctors, but do your best to get out. I stayed with my doctor. I don't know how many times I went back to her, but for several months, even though it made, like, before I would walk into her office, my belly would be like nervous because I had just moved here. I was 21. I didn't really realize, I'd never had a bad experience with a doctor. I moved here from Canada, and I would never, now, like, I once gave somebody a second chance on the advice of a friend, and he was still condescending to me. Patronizing is a good word. He was very nice, but he was patronizing. And I stopped going to him. And I found somebody wonderful who was totally collaborative. So that's part one. But part two is also really critical, and that's the one that a lot of us don't do. And you know what? I don't think I ever did it for that doctor, but there are others, and I have written some, is to write them a letter. And ideally, and it's your choice if you want it to be an angry letter, you can do that. But if you want them to listen, you would do your very best to write a more even-handed letter that tells them why you left. Because doctors don't know. They think they're doing a great job. They don't notice if a patient moves on, or they don't realize it's because of their poor behavior or poor medical care. And so that's critical. And the other piece is, I was just thinking about the other day, you can also report them to their licensing board. Like, depending on how bad it is, you can report them to their licensing board. And that will, even if nothing is done and there's no discipline that time, that goes on their record. And if they have many of those, like multiple of those kinds of complaints, then it's been told, and potentially you could protect somebody down the line.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, definitely. Because like you said, doctors who don't get feedback, patients just leave and they're like, oh, she must have moved away. They're like, no, you were awful. Like, it does, and they might not, they might just be wonderful people and not realize how their behavior impacts their patients.
Yeah.
But it is really important feedback, because otherwise doctors, they don't know. And it could very much transform their thinking around how they approach either illnesses or certain patients. I think it's really helpful. So I know we have a couple of writers in this space, so I want to ask you a craft question. As mentioned in the intro, your book explores, actually you mentioned it, that your book explores American history, toxicology, biology, medical history, economics, environmental history, sociology, and chaos theory, among other things.
And more.
And more. There's more, but wait. So as a health journalist who wrote a memoir with a much narrower scope, I'm wondering how you organized your thoughts on each topic and wove them into a coherent narrative, because you did a beautiful job.
Thank you. I might not answer that directly first, but I'm gonna make sure I answer it.
Okay.
Because what I'm thinking about is, I just wanted to say, like, I didn't set out, I did not plan to be writing about such a broad swath of things. But what I was doing is following my curiosity. I wanted to get to the bottom of it. Like, where does this start? And I guess, and some of that's because I'm trained as a social worker, and social workers are trained to not look at the individual as the problem, but to look at the society and what are the things in the culture that are contributing to the problems that the individual is having. And so without even knowing it, my training was totally informing how I wrote the book. And I didn't realize till years later when I was teaching an introductory class called Human Behavior in the Social Environment that every single social worker takes. You're a social worker. I was seeing you nodding, and I was like, and that was the giveaway, that was the tell right there.
We weren't gonna even come to this, we were over there. We could argue. We heard social work, I was like, oh, okay.
Thank you. So that's like what we're trained, and that's why, I mean, it was cool to not even know that that's what was influencing me until it was done, pretty much. But then the other piece was, like, I wanted to write this memoir, but I also knew that I wanted to write something that was, like, deeply researched, very rational, legitimate information that skeptics could believe. So it wasn't just, so I wanted to blend both. I wanted to blend memoir, which to me is about the heart, and I wanted to blend research, which is about the head. And like a lot that's wrong with our medical system is like the doctors are trained that what's in your head is what's important. And to actually not listen to your heart and not have feelings because they're dangerous. And that actually, they're taught that protects them from burnout, but it actually puts them at risk for burnout, whereas connecting with people can help. Yeah. According to the research, it's in my book and it's footnoted. And
so weaving a coherent narrative among all of these fascinating topics, and how did you get them all to work so beautifully in your book?
As we were preparing, I warned Catherine that I'm not a linear thinker, and that's evident in the book. But I still know how to put a book together that makes sense and that doesn't feel, and some of that's because of the memoir through line that my agent was wise enough to tell me should be linear. So that goes from like beginning to end. And then tell me the question again. So
you also have Alice as a lovely narrative,
yes.
Like just an anchor.
Yeah.
She comes up throughout as well. But I'm curious, as someone who writes very narrow scoped articles, how you, or just from a craft perspective, kept all of these very complex topics separate and then wove them together in a way that made sense narratively in your head and just kind of organizationally in your space.
And I did it over a period of like 20 years.
20 years.
With breaks. But it's kind of a mind-boggling question to even try to answer.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, it's a great question, and I want to try because I didn't have any one method. I just did what I needed to do in the moment. And so, like, I had a book proposal. It wasn't the one that actually got me I wrote like 3 proposals before I finally found an agent and an editor. But the book proposal gave me a sense, like I had to outline a sense of like what direction I wanted to take, and I knew the main points I wanted to make. And I knew like some of the memoir stuff, but I wrote the memoir. Some people write, I have a friend who writes her research to help make sense of the memoir, to contextualize the memoir, but I wrote my memoir to help support my research. And so the memoir, but I can't say that that meant that I always wrote the memoir second. And then I would like follow my nose and like go down all these paths that were amazing, and many got in, not everything. And
you started out not writing a memoir, just a factual third person.
yeah, I think before I started writing, I had this idea that I would make it very factual in third person because that would be most convincing. And then I got afraid that, I wasn't afraid, I think it was legitimate. Well, maybe not. It just felt like that wasn't gonna, it's easier to hold people's attention if you have story. And if you have memoir that they can connect with their hearts. And sometimes, like, I would get on a subject and then I would do a lot of research on that one thing that would maybe made one segment in the book, and that would go in. And I just kind of, it wasn't as chaotic as I can, I mean, it seemed, but it wasn't linear.
That's okay.
It's not prescriptive, basically.
Yeah.
It feels like I kept a lot of notes.
Mm-hmm.
I was very diligent about footnoting my notes so that I knew where everything came from. And I don't have a good memory for facts and details, so I had tons of notes.
Yeah.
And I didn't use Scrivener, which would have been great. I used Word.
But it worked.
Scrivener's like this program where you can like move stuff around, you can see it all, but it requires, there's a huge learning curve, and if you're not a technically inclined person,
Yeah.
I just felt like
It can be a little overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my next question is about I'll just read it. So you don't reveal much about your relationship with your husband in the book, but you do write about Alice's relationship with Catherine Peabody Loring, an education reformer and activist. And I personally love that Alice and Catherine's relationship was the inspiration for the term Boston marriage, which was coined by Alice's brother Henry. Could you speak to the role of intimate relationships coexisting with chronic illness? And could you address how you decided what to include about your own marriage?
Yeah. So I did include some about, because I was writing a linear narrative, I did include like, meeting my husband, and I included some about my husband, but not a lot. It didn't feel relevant to the points that were most important to me to make, and I was already way over my word limit. But one thing that's really difficult for people who have a chronic illness or an acute illness or some other kind of disability is they think that nobody's going to want them. And I kind of wish that I had actually like fleshed it out a little bit more with my partner, who's been like amazing. He knew I was sick when we were together. It wasn't a huge disability at that point. Once in a while it would be something we would have to cope with together. But he was there when I had a relapse in 2019 that lasted 7 months, and I was on the couch and he was doing every single thing to do all the chores. He was driving me to appointments, and he was like amazing. And like, I just think it's so important to know there are people in the world who would just love you for who you are. Just like Alice, she got together with Catherine. She was so smitten with Catherine, who was so smart and strong and probably more feminist than Alice was at the time. And I just think people are afraid that they're just going to be a burden and people only see them for that, for their disability. But people see you for the light that you are. And Alice was a light in the world, even though she was mostly bedridden. So that's, I think, what I would answer to that. Did I cover it?
I love it. That was a wonderful answer. Thank you. Yeah. And my last question is, according to chaos theory, which I learned about thanks to you, a tiny insignificant event or circumstance can have an outsized influence in shaping the way a large complex system evolves into the future. And the most famous example is the butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil, ultimately leading to a tornado in Texas. But using that principle, if your book was a butterfly, what outsized influence do you hope it has in the world?
I had a lot of vision. I mean, that's part of, again, that's the other part of the fire under my ass, was like, how do I change the culture? And I have big dreams. Like, I want, one of my dreams is to reach med students and to start going and speaking to med students, and maybe for them to read the book. That would be amazing, because most med students get zero training in MECFS, zero. Only 40% of textbooks even mention MECFS. So when doctors are dismissive, it's because they don't know. They haven't been trained. So I want to train them, or at least teach them through empathy and through facts, like what this illness is, so that they understand that they need to take women's illnesses seriously. And even if it's not MECFS, it could easily be an autoimmune disease, which we're just learning about, and that primarily affects women, and it takes women forever to get diagnosed with those diseases. So that's one thing. And the other is the smaller scale, which is, I'm going to tell a little story. I'll start by saying very quietly in this bookstore, but maybe that's okay, that I have an audiobook. So the book's out in audiobook. And is that for you? And my husband listens to a lot of audiobooks, and when I hear them, I don't really like the voices. They sound so like formal and articulated. And so my editor sent me five people who could potentially do the narrative for my book. And the first one I listened to, I instantly liked her voice. It felt very natural. I liked her. I picked her. The agent said, "Let's hope we can get her," and we did. And then after we got her, a few weeks later, I found her on Instagram, and I said, "I am so glad that you are the narrator for my book." And she said, "I am so glad that I got to be the narrator for your book. I think your book was for me what I think Alice James's biography was for you." And that was right before my book came out. And I was like, oh my God, there's the macro, like changing the culture, but there's the micro of helping one person feel seen, recognized, not alone, be able to give a book to a loved one or a doctor and say, you need to read this if you want to understand my illness and me. So that's another piece.
That's huge.
That's good. So that's the micro. And then I want to go back to the macro, because my other even bigger vision is like, this book is about the health harms of industrial capitalism. And I would like to help change that culture. I mean, we're obviously in this really fraught time, but it's not totally been taken over by the industrial capitalists, and there are lots of people on the other side fighting for more equality and fairness.
Yeah, it's a huge issue, and it's not going away anytime soon.
Yeah.
And I think more and more people are becoming aware of it.
Yeah, and I did make sure when I was writing the book that I knew I didn't want to just write a depressing book. And part of how it's not depressing is somehow by telling stories, even if they're about like illness. Mm-hmm. But the other way is at the end, I had to do some research, but I did figure out some ways to feel hopeful. And I wrote about those things, and I even included some things that people can do, some actions that you can take, so that we're all sort of working together to help change the bigger culture.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic.
That's
Thank
all.
you so much. That's all. Does anyone have any questions for Lunden?
So, for years, I've tried to write a book. And, being a single parent with 2 kids and working as a therapist, I'll start to write a little bit, and everyone wants me to write the book, and everyone tells me to write the book, but it is so hard. And I know you just talked about that fire under your ass, but I totally get, I think I am not with you.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna say something specific to another therapist. It may not work for you, but one thing I did, I'll speak back into the mic. Did you all hear the question? Do you want me to? Okay, so one thing I did, because I was writing on weekends, and I was seeing clients Monday to Thursday, and then writing Friday, Saturday, Sunday, almost every weekend. I mean, you have to give up a lot. I wasn't going out, and that's okay. I mean, I did once in a while. I'm an introvert. It was okay, but like that's choice making that needs to happen for people who have to work when they also want to write. But then I had a therapist who he took what he called a light week, once every month, where he only saw the clients in the greatest need, and he otherwise was at home doing whatever his own work. And I restructured my clients so that I was packing them all into 3 weeks, and I would take the 1 week for my writing week. And that really helped me have more momentum. And the other, I don't know if this is helpful, but the other thing I did is I learned to start writing a letter to future Lunden. I go by Lunden. And that in that letter, so at the end of the week when I was finishing writing, and it was always like, oh no. I just built up all the momentum, and then I had to drop it. I would write a little note to myself, and it'd be the first thing I would open the following month, and I would tell myself like where I left off and where I thought I was going, and I would also cheer myself on and like tell myself how much I had accomplished, because I think most writers and most of us as humans probably, especially in America, we're so focused on what we are failing to do that it's hard for us to really take in how much we are actually doing, which is also true for therapists working with clients. I just happen to know personally. Does that answer your question enough, or do you? Okay.
Anybody else have a question for Lunden? Mary. Thank you.
I'm curious as somebody who has such a strong critique of the medical establishment in the U.S., just how you reflected on that as somebody from Canada.
Yeah. But you. So I was born in Texas on an army base during the Vietnam War to American parents. But my father's job moved him to Canada when I was 6. So I was raised in Canada amongst like Canadian culture. And then when it came time to start my adult life, I decided to move to Maine. My mom had left the family and lived in Maine since I was 11, and I always felt at home when I landed there. And all of this is to say, so the culture, I grew up in a culture where everybody gets health care. Everybody is covered, no matter what. You don't have to have a job, you don't have to be disabled, you just get it. And Americans don't know what that feels like. Like, it literally feels different, even if you're not the sick one, because you know there's a safety net for you, for your loved ones, for everyone. And it creates this culture of safety. And I've been learning, of course, like now, as somebody who's been living in America since the age of 21, I have many of us who are on the left side of the political spectrum think of Canada as like the, what do we say, bread and honey? What's that word?
Yes, the land of bread and honey.
Where all
it's
things are,
utopia.
yes, and it's not a utopia. And if I live there, I'm sure I find things to criticize. But it has a healthcare system where everybody is covered. And I think that's such an important message for somebody like me to be able to convey. And I have a Facebook friend who's living in the Netherlands from the US, and she often talks about, like, we went to the doctor and the bill was $12 for this huge surgery. And she talks about the schools, the way the schools are different there. And like that kind of information from the outside helps us to realize what's possible. Did I answer your question, Mary, or is there more?
Yeah, no, I think in some ways, I'm just curious, like as you are experiencing the disorientation of not having medical experts listening to you, did you ever have a sense that you just wanted to go back to Canada, but now you've answered it, you were here and that this felt like home, and I just can't imagine that sense of feeling both at home and dismissed.
Yeah, and the thing is, so yes, I have romanticized, and I have actually, after, which election did the very bad thing happen?
2016, the very
After
bad thing.
After the 2016 election, I was survived by getting onto Google Maps and Street View and like driving around looking at mid-sized Canadian cities on the East Coast. And it was,
I think a lot of us did.
Yeah. And so I was just in bed doing that for days. And my husband and I went and looked at some beautiful mid-sized cities on the East Coast. And then we went a second time. I mean, I was like finally, I've been tempted to go before, and I was like, because he could go with me because we're married. But that time, that was the most motivating. I was scared, as a lot of us were, and I have the freedom to go to be in either country. And you may not all have been to Portland, Maine, but it is I just love Portland, Maine. I have looked for other cities, and St. John, New Brunswick was very close, but we just couldn't do it. And the thing is, yes, we would have health care, but it doesn't mean that we would have a doctor who understands about ME/CFS, because that ignorance is like worldwide. And America is like the leader. We're a huge country. We design and distribute a lot of pharmaceuticals, and people look to us for knowledge. And so when our CDC says, well, if people with ME/CFS just exercise more and change their thinking, they would be better, which the CDC did say, and it's in the book, why they did that, and that they only changed that a few years ago, then that affects the culture worldwide. So I would like to be in Canada because I know my body would feel safer there, not just for healthcare, but also gun control. But I love Portland too much, I just can't do it.
It's a beautiful city. Any other, Bonnie?
Yeah, well, congratulations on your perseverance.
Thank you.
I was really moved by that story you told about the narrator of your book. And I was wondering, now that your book is out, what has the experience been like for you?
It's been so wonderful to get to hear from people. I just got somebody that I had no mutual friends with on Facebook asked to be friends, and I usually look carefully. And I looked around, I was like, oh, she looks legit, and she actually looks like she might have listened to this interview I did with a lesbian playwright in Maine who has a YouTube following. And so I allowed her, whatever the word is,
Friended her.
I let her in.
Open the gate.
And she messaged me and she said, I am so grateful that to hear that interview with Carolyn Gage. My friend and I immediately bought the book. I'm on page 169, and I don't remember specifically what she said, but like even the fact that she's telling me she's grateful at that page, it just says how much, like, I don't even know what her story is, but I'm guessing she has a similar illness and she finally feels heard. I mean, I just can't, even though I wrote a whole book about it, I feel like I can't express how much it means to feel heard and see yourself reflected in the story of somebody else. Yeah. And that, the narrator for my book, we became Facebook friends, and shortly after, I'm allowed to tell the story. She's given me permission that she has her own illness that's one that's not taken very seriously and is very difficult. And it seems like she got more politicized after reading my book. And I felt like she was sort of saying, come on, everybody. And that's the thing. That's like the butterfly wing, right?
Exactly.
One person reads it, and then who knows where she'll take it. And all these other people, and maybe people in this room too.
Yeah, exactly.
All my little butterfly
All
friends.
the butterflies. Aww. Wow. Thank you so much, Lunden. I really enjoyed talking with you about your book.
Thank
It's such
you.
a joy, and I loved reading it, and I know how much work you put in, and it's been so good knowing you and then seeing this come to fruition and being able to celebrate with you. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. If anybody wants me to sign a book,
Folks can come right on up.